It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Hudak Nation and Hudak family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, the daily podcast covering your New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's episode, we're going to be joined by Maddy Hudak of USA Today's SaintsWire, as well as ESPN Radio NOLA, to give us the download on the offense and defensive side when it comes to Wednesday's training camp, day 12 practice, everything that we need to know, thanks to Maddy Hudak. But before we get to that, we're going to talk a little bit about Michael Thomas and the New Orleans Saints, a report coming out from Charles Robinson of Yahoo saying that the team and player are ready to put things behind them and move forward. We'll talk about the report and what it means for the New Orleans Saints and, of course, Michael Thomas, all on today's episode of Locked On Saints. And as always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson NOLA on Twitter, co-managing editor over at CanalStreetChronicles.com, and your Tuesday co-host over at the National Locked On NFL podcast. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints, your team every day. All right, family, kicking off today's episode with a bombshell report around Michael Thomas and the New Orleans Saints. But don't worry, it's actually a positive one. After everything that the New Orleans Saints and Michael Thomas have been through over the course of the last, I want to say couple of weeks, but really you can look back to the last few months, going back into the regular season, all the things that went down there, the suspension, so on and so forth, the fight in camp, the injury, the offseason surgery, whatever it is that you want to highlight. There have been a lot of opinions being thrown around. Is it the New Orleans Saints' fault? Is it Michael Thomas's fault? We here at Locked On Saints have tried to keep a level head about it and just report the facts and say, doesn't really matter whose fault it is. It matters what happens next. Well, we get a little bit of a glimpse thanks to Charles Robinson of Yahoo Sports, who shows us a little bit of what is coming next for the New Orleans Saints and Michael Thomas. The report is basically alleging that Michael Thomas and the Saints, particularly Sean Payton, sat down and had a good talk with one another about their frustrations around everything that had been taking place. The quote here says, they had a good talk about the issues, according to one source. I think that they believe that there's not anything about this that has to go any further than what's already out there. There was some frustration from both viewpoints, and that was the point of the meeting. And then a second source of saying about the meeting, I think and hope they worked things out. So this is good news for New Orleans Saints fans, for the New Orleans Saints, and for Michael Thomas. There have been a lot of reports out there about whether or not Michael Thomas was going to be traded, questions about what the New Orleans Saints could return for Michael Thomas, all these other things. And we've really maintained here, it's not about what went wrong, it's about what happened next. And if this is what's happening next, where the two sides are coming together, opening communication, and dealing with their frustrations as opposed to just being frustrated, then this is good news for all parties involved, in particular for the New Orleans Saints, who by no means want to lose Michael Thomas. This is just not a reality for them that they would choose to be in the midst of, right? You'd be essentially shipping off over $30 million of dead cap for yourself that you would be signing yourself up for by trading him. Your depreciated value in terms of what you would get back for him because of the injury, because of the antics, because of the social media stuff, everything like that. There was a general manager that's also quoted in this same article that says that basically a healthy Michael Thomas will yield you a pretty good return in a trade, first round pick and a third round pick type of package, the usual trading a superstar wide receiver type of package. But right now, because of everything centering around him, his depreciation, or his value, may have depreciated rather to a second round pick and a third round pick in terms of what the market value might have been for him. And that's just not really worth moving on from a superstar wide receiver who's supposed to be an eraser for you when it comes to the changes that you're having to go through at the quarterback position. So the Saints, if everybody is able to move forward here, not having to move on from their superstar wide receiver, having the guy that they need when he's healthy and able to return to help to sort of pacify the quarterback changeover situation that the Saints are in the midst of, and not having to eat $30+ million of dead cap, definitely all the optimal situation for the team. And for Michael Thomas, he gets to remain with the team that paid him, and he gets to remain with a team that's going to rely on him heavily when he returns, whether that be after the bye week, a little bit, a couple weeks after the bye week, whenever that might be. He'll be the focal point of the New Orleans Saints offense, he and Alvin Kamara. So at least he'll have that to look forward to. Now, will Michael Thomas finish his contract with the New Orleans Saints? Like I always say, I don't expect that ever from any star players. But, if you listen to Nate Burleson, who is now going to be heading over to CBS, by the way, and then a nice little update from him on Good Morning Football on Wednesday morning. But he tells Michael Thomas, hey, get it all together, get it figured out, return to the team, and retire a Saint. I don't think that the New Orleans Saints or New Orleans Saints fans will be disappointed to see that at all. So finally, some good news coming about for the New Orleans Saints and Michael Thomas in the midst of this situation. Coming up next, we're going to get more news from Maddy Hudak talking about everything going on in day 12 on Wednesday of camp. Here we are, game prep week, Saturday. The New Orleans Saints going to be taking on the Baltimore Ravens. So this becomes a very important week of practice, and this becomes a very important offer for you as well as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. And this offer is over with our good friends over at betonline.ag. Now, if you're like me and you like taking big risks, sometimes you do like to get in on the preseason action right now, or at least the last I checked, the New Orleans Saints plus 125 when it comes to the line up against the Baltimore Ravens. It is tough to bet on preseason games because you never know which way it's going to go. But hey, if you're looking to warm up a little bit like I am for the regular season, then you might as well go ahead and get on some of this action as well. And if you don't like betting on preseason games, I got to tell you, I don't blame you. But you can take a look at futures, you can take a look at win totals as well, and everything else around the world of sports and beyond over at betonline.ag. So go ahead and check them out. And don't forget to use the promo code LOCKEDON when you sign up for your account. And when you put down your first deposit, so you can get a 50% welcome bonus on that first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus, 50, by using the promo code LOCKEDON over at BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. All right, y'all, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, and we are joined by my very, very dear friend and our very, very special guest, Maddy Hudak, on Twitter at Maddy Hudak _94, one of the co-hosts over at ESPN Radio NOLA, and so much more on the way. And of course, you can also catch all of her writing covering the Saints over at USA Today's SaintsWire. Maddy, thanks so much for being here with us today. How are you?
Thank you for having me. Sorry, my cat just flew under my legs and distracted me, but otherwise, we're doing good. Yeah, it's been a day.
Yeah, I'm sure. It got caught in the rain. You had to try to sprint your way back around. It was quite a day for you. So I appreciate you taking the time to join us.
It was actually an audition for receiver.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
part of that was unclear, but
yeah. I don't know how high the bar is these days, but certainly if you moved, you passed. So we'll be seeing Maddy out on the field on Saturday. Speaking of players out on the field, I want to start off our segment here. We're going to talk offensive standouts and notes that you observed in Wednesday's practice, and then we'll shift over to defense. But before we get to that, players that weren't on the field on a Wednesday that are just a quick mention here: Peyton Turner, Pete Werner, Traquan Smith, PJ Williams, Marcus Williams, Jalen McCleskey, Quentin Poling, Kavari Russell, Adonis Alexander. And if you feel like that list was long, it's because it was. And of course, you can add to this list now Ty Montgomery, who was carted off at a point during camp. He did return. And just for reference sake too, Traquan Smith was present and in street clothes. Ty Montgomery came back outside, but didn't participate in practice as far as I understand it. So let's talk about the offensive side here, including maybe some of those injuries, if you want to touch on anything there. But in terms of the offense, what were some of the your big takeaways and notes from Wednesday's practice day 12?
Well, I mean, McCleskey not being out there was frankly like one of my takeaways, and it was a little dominating of my brain for a majority of practice because, we don't really get an explanation as to why players aren't out there. From what Nick Underhill has said at this point, it seems to be a minor hamstring injury. Ty Montgomery, someone did notice while he was getting carted off that it looked like he was ripping a lot of pads off in like a heat type of situation. And I didn't see him back, but I like the field was doing this with the heat at a certain point. So probably was like 12 feet in front of me, and I just didn't re-enter my consciousness at this point. Yeah. In terms of standouts on the offense, Juwan Johnson and Lil Jordan Humphrey, for like what it's worth, them to be really fringe players last year in an offense that really just wasn't generating at all. There seems to be a consistent target for both Hill and Winston towards LaJordan Humphrey and Juwan Johnson. Thought Chris Hogan and Adebo had like several good, nice matchups where some, like, I think one of them was an incompletion and the other one was a completion. And both of them, it was just, kind of a good play by both sides kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when we were on the radio hosting and we were like, we need to disagree with each other at some point because it's just a lot of like very good points. Yes, I agree. And these are also some good points, and this is here why. That's what kept feeling like with like, Hogan versus Adebo and, CJ Gardner-Johnson making a really good play on a ball and, punching out a reception.
Yeah.
There really wasn't that much of an offensive standout, as my long-winded point of saying. And again, I think that it's still something I'm willing to give the defense most of the credit for. Hill and Winston still aren't impressing me. I'll totally just go into my, full-blown delusion at this point and say that like Ian Book continues to impress me in camp. And
I gotta tell you, people are becoming very supportive of Ian Book, and they're becoming very supportive of the prospect of seeing Ian Book during these preseason games. I'm not saying people are championing Ian Book to be the starter this season, but certainly what you have seen from him gives you some hope for what he could potentially be in terms of his potential in the future.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I feel like we all needed to see in person to really understand. I feel like we kind of had that conversation when we were talking with Dylan about Ian Book, and it was like, no, I really didn't believe it either until I actually saw it in person. And a lot of the intangibles there are really surprising, but he continues to like improve on a daily basis to me. I thought that he has one of the best touches on the ball and consistently the best spiral that's being thrown throughout camp on a lot of passes. And he's not getting as many reps as he was a couple of days ago. And I wouldn't really take that as a knock because everyone kind of seems to be like a perfect, actual, legitimate throw down the field. And I think they're really at this point focusing more on the Simeon factor, in that they've kind of, it's almost what you wanted to see in the primary competition, where someone had kind of run away with it at this point, and now we're giving a little more look to the other guy to see if there's something that he can improve on. But that's taking way more place, with Ian Book and Trevor Simeon. And I just think I can't, if I keep analyzing this quarterback situation, it's just, there's nowhere to really go from here until we actually see both of them in a preseason setting in playbook suited to their strengths. Because there's something to be said about what the mental limitations are when you kind of put someone in a box. Like when Taysom wasn't able to use his legs really, and I think a lot of that was largely by design and trying to really push the pure pocket passer thing. To me, if that's someone's natural inclination and then they have to take that moment to pull that back and then get back into it, it's just so much. I don't know. I did a lot of like mental task switching neuroscience stuff in college. And it really is hard when you have something that's such a natural inclination for you to have to really like rein that in and then go back to what at that point is. Yeah. And then it feels less natural because you don't have the choice really. And it's the same thing with Jameis Winston in kind of these intermediate throws where you've seen his decision-making kind of start to go down. But today, where the offense was a lot more spread, he appeared to be much more in his element. And so I think we talked about this in the show with Juice last night, that like while training camp ultimately does suit Winston's strengths better and should, have illuminated that a little more, I still think ultimately both of them haven't shown their best yet. I don't know. And that's where my attention goes to Ian Book, literally like fusing to the hip of Ronald Curry, like not even after his own reps, like he'll die down and then another quarterback will run a play and then he'll go and talk to Ron Curry. And then Ian is suddenly in the huddle, like the annoying cousin that won't go away. Like it was kind of like laughable to an extent, but that's what I wanted to see more from Hill and Winston in camp, was the noted, stuff that I'm seeing from Pulse and Adebo as well on the sidelines, like going over things in your head. Chris Hogan kind of taking mentorship of this receiver corps. But it's really that Hill and Winston haven't flashed to me enough in the drills, and then really haven't done anything outside of the drills. And some people might say that that's completely unimportant, and they might be correct, but just, in what I'm looking to observe and what, qualities I think they've also highlighted as being kind of the important ones in replacing Drew. And it's not accuracy, it's not legs, it's intangibles, and it's leadership. And I've seen it more from this rookie guide, so I'm just really interested to see all three of them play. And I mean, I'm sorry, I no offense to Trevor Siemian, but it's just 4 quarterbacks on the roster. It's not your time to be
right
on the roster.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it makes a lot of sense. And we're going to talk about the defensive side here in just a moment. Want to point out one big play, from Jameis Winston, about a 50-yard touchdown pass to Deontay Harris. Might not be able to see that the first 2 games of the season, but hopefully, ideally, as soon as Deontay Harris is available, assuming that he is suspended at the beginning of the season, as we all expect that he will be. And Andrus Peat did return to practice on Wednesday. So good news for the offensive line. Stop throwing things at your computers. It is good news for the offensive line. Coming up next, we're going to shift over, talk a little bit about the defense. I've already heard Paulson Adebo's name a couple of times, so you know I'm a happy camper. Who else stood out so far in camp on Wednesday over on the defensive side for the New Orleans Saints? We're here with Maddy Hudak. And before we get to the defensive side, I want to remind you about our good friends over at rockauto.com. Go and check them out. All your auto parts needs. Get all of the pieces for cheap, but no cheap pieces, if you know what I'm saying. So you ain't got to worry about anything that you're not going to be getting over at those brick and mortar stores. You're getting the exact same parts at more responsible and reasonable prices, thanks to rockauto.com. So don't go over there and get upcharged because you're a do-it-yourselfer. Go to a place that celebrates you being a do-it-yourselfer, all from the comfort of your own home by heading over to rockauto.com on your mobile device or on your laptop. I bought a new part for my car. I needed to get a new headlight for my truck, and I was able to do so while I was literally sitting in the car while someone else was driving. I did this responsibly, of course. I was able to go ahead and just buy it while we were talking about it, and then I never had to think about it again. Showed up, switched it out. Super easy, thanks to a nice little YouTube tutorial that helped me out with all of it. But if you don't want to do it yourself, you could also take those parts to your local mechanic. That way you don't have to, you just pay for the labor. You don't have to pay for the parts, right? Then you end up getting a nice discount on the parts that way by going over and checking out our good friends over at rockauto.com, who have parts for whatever make, model, or year your vehicle may be. So go and check them out. Once again, rockauto.com. Don't forget to let them know, though, that Locked On sent you by writing Locked On in the How'd You Hear About Us section. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. Let's get it, Hudak Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with Maddy Hudak here, who was my partner in crime like the entire week that I was down at camp. She and I were together taking notes, sharing stuff, whispering, talking about, oh, this person's standing out. This person's looking really good. We had a whole 3-hour radio show that we did together here on ESPN Radio NOLA, so I knew that we had to have her come back through here for another episode of Locked On Saints. Talk about day 12 over in training camp. We talked about the offensive side. Not a lot of big standouts over on the offense. Got a little update on the quarterback side, but let's talk a little bit about the defense here in terms of some of your notes and observations from Wednesday's training camp day.
Yeah, well, I was particularly upset that you weren't here for, the forthcoming of the Paulson Adebo party at Ross Jackson's house. But
listen, I'm ready. I'm going to provide not only the chips, but the dip. You know what I'm saying? I'm really excited about Paulson Adebo right now.
Well, I mean, he is bringing the entertainment thus far from what I've seen every day. And like I said, it's that I notice him on the field, and then it's very noticeable off the field what he's been doing, just over it. It's like kind of obsessive where it's like, okay, dude, you just finished a rep. Like you don't need to be stutter stepping on the sidelines, like right again. But that's how his brain seems to just keep kind of going. And what I really actually liked the most about Adebo today wasn't that every single play was a positive one, but it's that one of the things that they kind of noticed towards, when he started to decline a little in the 2019 season was that it looked like he was starting to get beat more, and it was starting to get to him from a mental perspective more. And when I talked with his trainer, Clay Mack, about this, they were very candid about the mentals being a component, because it's the idea of it's not if you get beat, it's when you get beat and how you respond. And he got beat by Hogan and I think it was Harris or Callaway, one of the two today. But it was that he immediately followed those both up with pass breakups and incompletions that I was really happy to see that. And again, I know it's just training camp, but these are the traits that weren't so much apparent on day 1 that are showing more on day 12, to where there's noticeable growth tested, aside.
Yeah, one of the things that Jeff Ireland mentioned about drafting Paulson Adebo, who is kind of in their third tier of corners, he and Eric Stokes were kind of in the same level. And of course, Eric Stokes ended up going in the first round to the Green Bay Packers. But the way that it sort of, one of the things that they pointed out was Paulson Adebo's confidence began to lack in 2019, which is something that they really wanted to see him sort of improve and be back to that 2018 level of confidence as he got through camp and got into the NFL. They consider confidence to be maybe one of the most, if not the most important defensive back in a, intangible or trait, whatever you want to call it. And so it's great to hear that that has absolutely been something that has been bolstered within his skill set, that confidence is coming back, because the football IQ is there, the ability to play the position and the ball skills are there, but can he forget when those bad plays, quote unquote, happen?
Yeah. And so that's was my takeaway from today. The pass breakup was cool. We've seen a ton of pass breakups and a ton of deflections, he's had several interceptions through camp as well now too. But that's really what I was looking for, just because I had read exactly that same idea of Ireland's take on Adebo. And then, in talking with the guy he spent the entire year with, trying to kind of fix what went wrong, that led to his draft stock dropping. So, I mean, again, there's only so much you can see in camp, but there's nothing that I have seen thus far that should show me otherwise that I shouldn't be buying into this. Again, with Rashard just so obviously being a factor here. And people keep, pointing out that Ken Crawley has had standout years in the past in training camp. He's also had good seasons in the past. He just had a bad one. And he did not allow a catch for the first 7 days of camp. And it wasn't because these receivers are awful, and it wasn't because every single throw his way was inaccurate. I mean, there were some of those that were, but
sure,
he was, pulling more of a CJ Gardner-Johnson today than CJ Gardner-Johnson getting up in Taysom's face, being like, try me again on this. That's the energy I want to be seeing. I can believe a world where Ken Crawley is opposite Marshawn Lattimore in week 1 if there is no suspension on Lattimore. It's been interesting how I've seen them switch Adebo low, because he's the one backing up Lattimore when he's in the 2s. But obviously he didn't take Lattimore's place when he was in with the 1s today. He took it opposite in Ken Crawley's space. But to me, it seems like they're in a possibility world where that is, the suspension, that they are playing him in that CB1 slot, at least in first team, in second team reps, but then he's also getting much more first team reps than at the start of camp. So that's also just very encouraging.
Yeah. Absolutely. Real quick, before we wrap up here, just about a minute or two left, want to talk about the linebacker position. We know Pete Werner was not available during camp today. He ended up leaving on Tuesday with I believe it was a right leg injury, if I remember correctly. He wasn't back. What did you see at the linebacker position on Wednesday?
It was, they're really just shutting down the run, first of all. Actually pretty strong run defense from what we've seen so far. And it really... I have almost probably an inappropriate amount of confidence in that interior, but Jalen Dalton had a sack on multiple people today, but he had a really hard one on Taysom, where it was the same thing that happened to Ian Book, but Taysom's legs are not Ian Book. So he didn't move, but you could hear it. I was like, oh, whoa, that was actual contact. Andrew Dowell making a ton of plays, like Chase. You've heard every single name that people have tried to kind of put out there as linebacker options, and I understand groaning. I mean, I had my Zaven Collins crush myself, but I mean, it just, and Quan wasn't even out. He might have been out there a little bit today, but I think they're still, getting him back out there. I think we'll probably see more of Quan in the preseason, but this is still at the point where it's more useful for Zach Bonham getting the training camp reps.
I love it. Maddy, we appreciate you so much for taking the time out at camp, doing 3 hours of radio, getting caught in the absolute tsunami that came out of nowhere, and then finding your way over here to Locked on Saints to help us get some of those camp observations from Wednesday, day 12. Saints in the middle of game prep. Friday's a travel day, but still another practice on Thursday, so we'll be able to bring all the updates there. And Maddy, of course, this will be far from the last time that we see you here on the Locked on Saints podcast. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me. This would have only been made better by Come Clean by Hillary Duff being the soundtrack in this whole saga, which just came to me now. So I will end with that.
All right, y'all. One more big thank you to Maddy Hudak at Maddy Hudak _94. We'll be seeing a lot more Maddy here on the show as we continue to move forward here, particularly during the preseason and training camp / practices as we get into game prep. So don't forget, Friday is going to be a travel day for the New Orleans Saints, but you'll still have a show here. I think we're going to be getting an unofficial depth chart pretty soon. I'm going to be keenly observing the linebacker spot to see where Quan Alexander ends up on that, because I'm starting to think I wouldn't be too surprised to see him a little bit higher than expected. Same thing for Pete Werner, who has missed the last couple of practices, so maybe he falls down. So we'll continue to talk about all that. And of course, we got to talk about Quan Alexander anyway, because I still want to get you these numbers on the way that Quan Alexander impacted the defense. So no matter what, that's coming up tomorrow. And hopefully that unofficial depth chart will be out so that we can kind of get an idea of the pole position for all of these players on the roster. So we'll cover all of that, and of course get you everything you need to know about Saints practice, training camp, news, analysis, and updates, everything that you need right here 5 days a week on Locked On Saints. As always, you can find me for everything in between over on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust to that nation. I'll holla at you.